When we think about the radicalization of individuals, when I've interviewed domestic extremists in the United States, like former KKK and white nationalists and others, almost exclusively, there's a story of there was a lack of empathy
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
support in their lives, which led them vulnerable to sort of join up with whoever paid them
Hmm.
attention and accept the orthodoxy that they presented. In international terror and the work that you did, is it a similar pattern? What leads to the radicalization of an individual?
Wow, how much time do we have? I mean, my very first book, The Threat from Within, looked at it, and I was based it on cases I worked in Canada, unclassified information, obviously. But we found the opposite, David. We found that these people were run-of-the-mill average Canadians. They were average from a socioeconomic status. They were average from an educational background. They were average from a family background. They were average insofar as we could tell. We're not psychologists from a mental health perspective.
Hmm.
There was nothing that sort of divided them or separated them from the general Canadian populace. And I've seen the same stats for the United States as well. In terms of Islamist extremism, I do think that when you look at the far right, KKK, the Boogaloo Boys, you might see that kind of a bit of a tendency towards the down and out in life. You often hear the term marginalized. You hear the term not making ends meet, failing in education, failing at relationships, failing at work. You don't see that on the Islamist side, but of course you have exceptions. You look at a country like France, yeah, and a lot of the people who join ISIS and Al Qaeda in France are on the lower socioeconomic spectrum. But I would argue, you look at French Muslim society in general, and it's generally speaking, it's on the lower. Your country and my country are very different. Muslims in our country tend to do very, very well. They tend to be highly educated. They tend to have good jobs, solid families, etc. In Europe, that's not the case for all kinds of historical reasons. Bottom line, David, is that there's no profile to any of this, and people that try to profile get into trouble because when you try to profile, you run into two problems.
Yes.
One's what I call a false positive. If you think that all jihadis or all right-wing guys are X, and somebody is X and is not a jihadi, that's a problem. And then if you say that no jihadis are well educated or no KKK are well educated, the first guy with a PhD you don't look at because he doesn't fit your profile. So when when I worked for the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, we didn't have a profile. We looked at activity. We looked at online statements, which we had warrants to intercept. We looked at what they said and what they did, not who they were, where they came from, or what their particular circumstances were. And I think that was successful for us.